This may or may not sound crazy to you, but not all characters are meant to fully transition every game. While that's obviously the goal, there are some big mistakes that new and low elo players tend to make when transitioning their build. What's poppin' everyone, it's your boy Levi, and eliminating one of these mistakes helped me climb through the ranks much easier once I realized I was making the mistake too. The first mistake I see people making is holding on to their credits way too long. This is a mistake I see players make specifically when playing solo. If you're playing with a pre-made team, you don't have to abide by this tip. You can pool your credits together and play accordingly. But on day 2, when playing solo, whether you contest an early game objective or not, you should look to make your first call in. Playing solo, you're always going to have the communication barrier with your team, so you need to compensate with being as strong as possible. When you have 200 to 250 credits, look to call in your first transition, whether it's a tree, meteorite, or mithril. There's a few exceptions to this rule. A character like Assault Rifle Isol or Assault Rifle Aya needs Judgment as their first transition. This is because the limited amount of ammo on your base weapon can really affect your damage output in a fight. These characters should look to save for 4-score and prioritize getting their Judgment online. And that brings me to my second mistake. I see players making the wrong transitions. The easiest way to find out what transitions your character needs is by joining the Character Hub Discord. I've talked about this Discord a few times on my channel, so I get surprised when people don't really know what it's about. In this Discord, every character has a channel, and every character has a top player representing that character. The rep will post the most updated builds and guides for the character, including transitions. Be sure to coordinate what your character needs. And sticking with characters, let's talk about what I mentioned at the start of this video. Not every character needs to transition fully. This will widely depend on comp, so let's take a few examples. Obviously, the goal is to fully transition your team, but some comps place higher priority on characters than others. This is where you'll have to swallow your ego a little bit. You might be the best player on your team, but if the comp doesn't fit you to carry, you might have to give up credits for your teammates. Here's some examples. Let's take a standard peel comp with 2 tanks or a support and a carry. For this comp, we'll go with 11, Priya, and Heart. The main damage is going to come from Heart. The goal of the 11 and the Priya is to keep her alive. Priya might look to pick up some healing reduction items to help with the fight due to her large AoE abilities, and 11 might pick up 1 or 2 transitions to help keep her tanky, but the goal should be to funnel transitions into the Heart. This is a pretty straightforward example. Next, for a dive comp, let's take characters such as Ekion, Daniel, and Luke. You want to transition a little bit more evenly. Think about this comp and what they want to do. Ekion will probably lead the engage, looking to get his VF gauge online and dash around the fight, creating knockups on priority targets for his team to follow up. Daniel and Luke should then follow up to clean up the fight. Daniel wants to eliminate a priority target, while Luke should apply consistent damage with Ekion on whoever is left. So who do you transition then? Comps like these are a little difficult to pull off. Daniel will need enough transitions to eliminate his target, which at the current state of Daniel isn't very many. Ekion will need to be tanky enough to absorb the initial damage he takes on engage, and Luke needs enough transitions to apply consistent damage for the rest of the fight. Look to build this comp fairly evenly with a slight emphasis on Daniel or Luke. But remember what I said about some characters having special instances with transitions? This is kind of a trick question. Ekion is one of those cases. Ekion needs a rare resource to get his weapon online. At the time of recording this, Ekion typically takes Tree of Life for their weapon upgrade. Look to contest Tree of Life on day 2 and pick up that tree for him first. Then transition your team accordingly. And for the last comp, the pick and poke comp, we'll go with Magnus, Ava, and Rio. You might be tempted to stack the Rio in this comp, and while that isn't bad, it would just require you to play it more like a peel comp. In a poke and pick comp, you want to start with transitioning to Ava first. Look for Magnus to get a slow with his Q on a target and have Ava launch abilities at the target from a safe distance. This is much more damage than Rio's longbow basic attacks would put out in a much faster time in the early game. Once one target is poked down, Magnus can look to hard engage with Bike, or you can play it slow, poking down enemies, forcing them to run away or take a 2v3. This works best when contesting objectives, as you'll force enemy teams into a bad fight and make them susceptible to third parties. You can also harass enemy teams who have already started to take the objective. Once again, your front line might take 1 or 2 transitions to help stay tanky. In the mid to late game, you'll want to look to transition Rio over the Ava. Most characters will be able to live Ava's initial burst, and you'll need Rio's consistent damage to help win the fights. The last thing that impacts whether you get your transitions online, I know this sounds obvious, but it's the amount of deaths between day 3 and 5. As I'm sure you're familiar, it takes 250 credits to revive a teammate at the kiosk. Make sure you stick together and play as a team. Also assess who's the most likely to get out of a fight when it's going poorly. Typically, your range carries are more likely to get out alive than your melee tank. If you're an all or nothing tank, then you don't need to be holding credits for a revive. Look to use those credits on yourself or for the carry. Alternatively, if you're a character like 11, she has pretty good escape with E and a lot of built-in tank with R and tactical skill, and there's a lot of enemy dive in the lobby. You might be the one to hold on to your credits for revive. It's going to come down to your ability to read the lobby. One tip that I'm constantly letting players know who submitted replays from my coaching series was that making the wrong play as a team is always better than one person making the right play while your team is on different pages. Stay together, be committed, work together, and use your credits accordingly. I know it's hard when playing solo, but think of reviving a teammate as one less transition for your team that you're going to have that game. Once you get into 2 and 3 revives, it's time to start playing for placement rather than the win. It's likely that you're going to be a couple transitions down from most teams. Hopefully this gives you some helpful insight on transitioning every game. Remember, every game is going to be different, so there's no hidden formula on how to make sure you have gold items every game. Realistically though, there are plenty of objectives on the map, so if I had to create a formula, it would be a day 2 objective, a call-in, a day 3 objective or purple box, another call-in, and then hopefully you either get an animal RNG, a teammate calls for you, or one late game objective, and then you're pretty likely to be fully transitioned. Sometimes you'll get a ton of RNG on animals, sometimes you'll have to use your credits on teammates. Try to put yourself in the most optimal situations to make the most out of your credits. To learn how to play characters in their most optimal way, you'll want to check out my Play Like a Pro series. Click or tap the screen now and you'll be taken to a playlist where we dissect the gameplay of NA's top players and see why they're so dominant in every game.